Hello and welcome to the Dapper Gaffer channel. I'm Josiah and we're here at City Stage Studios in Rockford, Illinois, talking about the new Litepanels Astra IP series. IP, of course, stands for IP rating, as these are fully IP65 rated, which means you can leave them out in the weather, and I think that's a very logical step in the progression of these lights, as a lot of these are used on location, so this is going to be a light that's right at home in that environment. Litepanels did send us these lights to keep, so thank you Litepanels for that, but we have used them out in the field on a handful of projects already, and this review is just our feedback on what we found with them so far. This is the Astra that you're probably all familiar with. This form factor, this is a 6x Astra, which was 6 times as powerful as the original 1x1 light panels that they put out ages ago now. This is the next evolution in the Astra line. And aside from the IP rating, which is a great addition to these features, they've really revamped the entire design of these fixtures from a component standpoint, while still, I think, staying true with the idea of the Astra form factor. So there's 3 different sizes of fixtures in this Astra IP line. We have 2 of them here today. This is the half, this is the 1x1, and they also have a 2x1 version of this fixture that's presumably twice the wattage, more output. But looking at these fixtures today, something I thought was a smart choice on their side, this Astra IP half actually has the same intensity, as the 6x Astra. It's half the array of diodes vertically and pulls 63 watts instead of the 105 watts that the 6x pulled. Why does that matter? Well, you can run it longer on a battery, and that was the whole idea. The one caveat with that is it's a narrower beam angle. So the beam angle on these guys is 30 degrees versus the 46 degrees that we had on the 6x Astra. So we get more throw, more long throw on less wattage, but we can still soften these out. And they have a few different options to do that. So each of these panels comes with this little diffusion sheet that you can slide in here. So that will soften it to a certain degree. Spread your light, make that beam angle a little bit wider. And then, of course, you have the Softboxes made by DOP Choice that we'll talk about in a minute. All right, so here's the 6x headed up next to these new IP fixtures, and let's just walk through some of the differences in build. Now, I've used the Astra a whole lot over the years. A lot of people have used it. It's a great light for what it's built for, but I honestly found it built a little bit flimsy. And these lights really correct that issue. It's a much more rigid design. I mean, you can see, I guess it's a little hard to show on camera, but the build of these is just much more substantial with the yokes, even the lock-offs. The overall build of the fixtures is just much more robust. That does come with a little bit of additional weight, as well as whenever you're adding an IP rating to a light, it tends to add weight with the rubber and things that make it waterproof. However, this half-sized unit is actually slightly lighter than the 6x for reference. This one is heavier in the same size, but as we mentioned, you do get the same throw out of this light as you do out of the 6x, but in a slightly smaller form factor. One thing you'll notice is that these have a straight yoke design versus the curved yoke that the 6x has traditionally had. Now, talking to Michael from Litepanels about that, part of the reason for that was to make them a little bit easier going in and out of cases, as that's a popular way to use these is as travel lights, or throw them in a bag and have a couple lights ready to go, Pelican case, something like that. The curved yoke makes that a little bit more complicated. The advantage of the curved yoke is to be able to tilt down further particularly when you have a softbox on it. But, getting all twisted up here, they have a clever solution to mitigate that issue in the design of the softboxes. And we'll show you that in a second. Couple more differences you'll notice on these is where the battery plate mounts. These would mount on the yoke. These ones can mount on the back of the fixture, although with this plate, you can also move it down to the yoke if you wanted to. On the half specifically, you don't necessarily have to have that battery bracket to mount it. It actually has some points on the light where you could just screw it straight in. And then you do need to use the little whip to connect the battery power to the light. This one has a separate connecting point because on these fixtures, they've switched to a Nutrix power connector, which I think is great, instead of that molded power cable that was on those units. And part of that, I'm sure, is the IP rating, as these are IP rated connections, whereas the molded power cables are not. The house power goes on that side, and if you want to run it on the battery, that goes on this side. Now you may be wondering, well, is the battery IP rated, this bracket? And the answer is no. However, they do have a different battery enclosure that will make this light completely IP rated. You can run it out in a battery, out in the elements, and that's a pretty nice option that not a lot of lights have, is to be able to actually power the fixture off a battery and have it out in the rain. One other thing you'll probably notice about these is the traditional Astra's never had a UI on here to see what's going on. You just kind of have to look at these dials, not a real precise way of knowing what percentage or color temperature you're at. But these guys have a new display on here which does a nice job of reading off that information. And they've kept the simplicity of operation where you have two primary dials to control the light. So this is going to be your intensity, and then this is your color temperature. Nice and simple, that's what we're used to. You can also bump this and it'll go up by increments on either one of these, which I think is a great feature. I like operating lights like that. The third dial on here, so you can go in and change certain settings. This is mostly for if you want to run it with DMX, or they do have an app that you can use with this. Otherwise, you don't necessarily have to mess with this dial at all. So if you're used to using a light like this, where you just set it on the stand, flip it on, and adjust your true parameters, you can still operate like that. But this gives you a little bit more advanced control and an easier way to configure things than we had with the DMX modules on these lights. Another part of the design philosophy on these was to just kind of strip them back to the most basic things that this form factor of light are used for, and not have extra features in there that are adding expense to it. So if you want DMX, that's a separate module that you can buy, and then you just unbolt this piece here and put it on there. And I believe that they're also developing a Lumen Radio module to be able to do that. But as it is, it just has an app control. So if you wanted to work it into a lighting grid or something where you're working with DMX or Lumen Radio, you would have to have a separate module to plug in to make that happen. So the menu is pretty intuitive, straightforward. You just dial through the settings like this, and you can click on the button to adjust things. At any time, you can long press this knob, and it'll go back to the main menu, which is a nice option. But just gives you that additional control for firmware updates or DMX settings, things of that nature. Right here on the light, simple, easy to use. Another nice thing about the control here is you actually have 0.1% increments of control. So that's very fine control. And if you spin it faster, you can get through it more quickly. So a lot of good things about these fixtures. I like the direction they're taking this line. I think it was time for an update. They sold a whole bunch of these units. They're everywhere. but honestly, there was some issues with it. This is a much more robust form factor. Feels like a more pro fixture. Like I can beat it up a lot more than this. And I think they made some good design choices overall. So kudos to Litepanels for taking a popular fixture and just morphing it into more of something that we want to use. There are a couple of downsides to these. Now, one, I've never really liked this idea of having to connect this extra cable in to get the battery to power these lights. And they've stuck with that form factor on these. You have to plug in this D-tap cable and go into this 3-pin XLR to power these fixtures. And something that's a little bit annoying on this half-size fixture, say that you put your battery on here. If you're a gold mount user like me, how do we mount these? They slide in from the side. But how this plugs in here, I have to actually unplug this connection to change the battery because it's in the way to get that off. So that's kind of a pain. So I could get the bracket mounted version of this battery plate and mount it down on this yoke here, which gets it a little bit more out of the way from that standpoint. So just something to be mindful of. If you're a V-mount user, I don't think that's going to be an issue because the batteries slide off vertically. So a minor annoyance on this one. This one, you can slide that battery plate up high enough that it's out of the way and you don't have to unplug it to get that installed. And I have to say I kind of prefer the battery mounted on the back of the light instead of on the yoke. Sometimes it gets a little bit in the way down here. So that's the battery plates. And if you wanted to get the IP rated battery plates, they mount in the same fashion as these ones do. So if I disconnect this power here, you can see the light's still running. It automatically switched power over to the battery. And we can run that at full power. This new 1x1 fixture pulls about 20 watts more than this one. This is 105 watts max draw. This is 125 watts. So slightly more power draw, but still within the range to comfortably run it on a lightweight battery like this 90 watt hour gold mount here. And it'll run for, about an hour, a little less. This one with the lower wattage at 63 watts will obviously run longer than either one of these ones will run at full power. So I like that it's a more seamless integration switching power like that versus this Astra, which you had to plug in the little D-tap whip, unplug the AC power. What are you going to do with that? I don't know, let it hang there usually, and plug that one in to be able to switch to battery power. I guess the slight advantage of that is that you could remove this ballast to make it slightly lighter. These ones, the power supply is built in to the housing, so you're not able to do that, but I would take the cleaner design of this and that quick power switching over this older swapping design. But that's my 2 cents. The other potential downside of these fixtures, depending on how you look at it, is that they don't have any green magenta shift. Now, I don't think that's a big issue for the target use case scenario for these lights. Usually, certainly when I use them, there have been situations where you're just grabbing them out of a case, slapping them on the stand and trying to be fast. You're usually not worried about matching the green magenta shift in the environment. It's kind of funny that we almost expect that green magenta shift now as manufacturers keep competing with each other and adding more features and this and that, the other thing. I think in this fixture, the simplification of the design, simple bicolor, makes sense. And I'm sure they were able to keep the cost down a little bit more because of that and get a little bit more output out of them as well. So for what it's worth, no green magenta shift, simple bicolor 1x1 light, true to its form. One more note about the menu system is you do get control over the fan as well. You can switch that off. Not that it's a particularly loud fan, but if you're in a real quiet environment, that could be a factor. But it does limit you to 50% output if the fan is off. Something to keep in mind. And a note on that, the half actually has no fan, so that option is grayed out in this menu system, but being less wattage, I guess it just wasn't needed to have a fan at all, so a note on that. One more way you can control these things, the color temperature, if you use this menu dial, just turn that. It actually will bring up the common Kelvin temperatures that you can just bump to quickly. So 32, 4K, 5600, and so on. You can just quickly jump to one of those color temps instead of dialing it in on this more gradually, if that's an option that you want to utilize. So this is what the light looks like reconfigured with the battery bracket mounted down here on the yoke instead. One thing to keep in mind is when you do that, you're going to need to loosen this hex bolt on the top, swing this lock off around to the front so that it doesn't interfere with the bracket. But if that's an orientation you prefer, that's an option. These simply just screw out these screws just a little bit, and then that bracket will come off of there. You can mount it there, or you can mount it there. And of course, you can get softboxes for all of these lights. But there's a couple differences in the design on these, which I thought I'd point out. I always thought this one was a little finicky to get on these Astras. You kind of have to put a little loop of elastic around there and fish this elastic out and keep that other piece on the front side. Just kind of finicky there. This one, these ones, they just strap around the back. One strap around the top, one strap around the bottom. Seems to do a pretty good job of holding it in place. On the inside, I also noticed how reflective a material that they used to, take advantage of that light bouncing around in there, versus on these ones, you can see it's silver, but it's a much more matte silver than this. So I imagine that it's contributing to a little more efficiency. Why they didn't do that on this one, I don't know, but it is definitely a shinier material in there. They come with the typical half grid on there. You can probably get full and quarter grid if you want as well, but half grid is the most common type used with these. Pops in there like so. And of course, you typically want to set it back into the box a little bit so that you have room to put the fabric grid on it if you wanted to. The other design difference, like we were mentioning earlier, notice how these boxes are fluted like this. That was an intentional choice to be able to still tilt these down pretty far with the softbox on it. See, look at that. We're still able to get a pretty extreme downward angle, even though it has a straight yoke on it. In fact, I think this tilts down a little further than that. Yeah. So there you go. I don't know, it just kind of looks, maybe it's because this one's old and beat up, but it just looks like a cleaner setup than this one as well. And of course, that just gives you more versatility in the light. Use it in more scenarios. So there's the spread of the half versus the original 6x. So you have a greater volume of light out of this guy because the beam angle is wider, but presumably we get the same level of output from this. So let's read that quick. Yeah, spot on. So getting the same intensity reading out of both of those fixtures, despite this one being 63 watts versus 105. And that's due to the tighter beam angle But obviously, if you're just trying to light a broader service or something like that, you're going to get more volume of light out of that one. If we compare this light, so that's the new 1x1 Astra. It's beam spread. Yeah, I'm getting about a stop more of light out of this. So you're getting twice the intensity of light out of this new Astra as you were out of this one. And yes, the beam angle's a little tighter, but in that same form factor, I feel like it's fairly comparable. I'm not noticing a huge noticeable difference on just how it's filling out that wall. Slightly tighter pattern. One other thing we noticed with these fixtures as we were messing around with them, the old Astras go from 3200 Kelvin to 56. So kind of that traditional tungsten to daylight range. The new Astras actually go all the way down to 2700 Kelvin. We'll just do that so you can see it. And up to 6500 Kelvin. So you have also an extended CCT range on these. I think that's a nice option to have. Particularly, I do like to go warmer than 3200 sometimes, because that's more like a traditional incandescent fixture, whereas 3200 is like halogen or kind of more studio lights. So cool thing I didn't notice before. So that's the Astra IP range, if you can imagine a 2x1 fixture right next to it as well. A logical progression to the Astra series. Litepanels really was the one who invented that 1x1 form factor and brought it to the film market. And keeping a light in that line, that's been a staple for quite some time now, is great to see. I think that Litepanels made some good design decisions to stay true to the form factor and the niche in the market that it serves, which in my mind is largely documentary filmmaking, news, broadcast, the corporate world. I don't know, people from New York who work out here I've worked with, some seem to love Astras. So I think they're going to sell a lot of these units. It has some very logical updates to the old Astra line that I think make it relevant for a longer period to come. It's not the most versatile Swiss Army knife of a light in your kit, but I think the price point they were able to keep it at with the features that it offers from a reputable brand, I think it plays an important part in the market still. So is this something I'm going to pack on my truck regularly? Well, on some of the bigger jobs, probably not, unless I just want a couple more punchy units that don't take up a lot of space that I can throw on there. I think a lot of times where I'm going to use these is on the smaller jobs where we're maybe doing like a pick and pack package or something in a smaller vehicle, a little more corporate oriented stuff. That's where I see these playing most for me personally. So since the day we recorded most of this out on the main stage, we did take the lights out on another project for a couple days that was a little more commercial oriented, where we were more precious about the scenes that we were lighting. We did several scenes each day, and I have to say that they played pretty well in that environment. I love the speed of them. Again, like we talked about on the day, just you basically pull them out of the case and they're ready to go. We ended up running the half on the battery quite a bit. In fact, in this one scene, I had it on a 90 watt hour battery, and we were in this setup for basically all morning and another setup after that. And while I wasn't running it at 100%, I was able to use that same battery the entire time we were using it. So it's very efficient and gives me a lot of punch, and it's pretty compact, as you can see in this footage, how we had it up on top of the cabinet there. And the 1x1, it just has a good amount of punch for just a fast light to get up and run. So yeah, I think I'll find myself putting these on the truck a little more often than I initially thought, just to kind of have that get out of jail free card. They're great for bouncing into ceilings to lift ambience. I am liking that little diffusion sheet that slips in there that softens it out a bit, gives it a nicer spread of light, when you're trying to fill something in without going full on softbox with it. So yeah, initially categorizing these in my mind where they're often played, with that kind of more run and gun corporate dock style stuff.
I do think they can play a pretty relevant role in lighting setups where you are, being more finessed about what you're lighting to. So figured I should throw in a little bit more of that hands-on experience before we wrapped up this episode.
Let me know what you think. Is this a light that you're going to add to your inventory? If you have Astras, are you going to upgrade to these? Or are you happy with what you got? Let us know in the comments. That's all we got for today. Thanks for sticking around. We'll see you on the next one. And that's lunch.
Cutting.
Where'd you get that shirt?
J. Crew.
They're gonna
Like it?
sponsor you.
Linen, baby. The fabric of summer.